Nintendo tried to pull a fast one on us by completely omitting any mention of price during the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. It wasn't until after the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct when we would finally see all of the scary secrets of the Nintendo Switch 2 pricing. The Nintendo Switch 2 will be launching at $450 for the system by itself, or you can also get the bundle that includes Mario Kart World for $500. Of course, with the overall state of the economy being an absolute dumpster fire right now, this price could obviously change. But it was honestly surprising to me that they would omit the price of the console from the Direct. Because in all honesty, $450 for the Nintendo Switch 2, sure, it's a lot more than the $300 we were used to with previous Nintendo consoles like the Wii U and the Nintendo Switch, but I wouldn't say $450 is completely crazy. Obviously, with the original Nintendo Switch still being sold for anywhere between $300 to $350, of course they're not gonna price the Nintendo Switch 2 the same price as the Switch 1, because then it sends the message that the Switch 2 is either equal or less than the Switch 1. I was honestly predicting $400, which I think a lot of us were also predicting as well, and I also believed that $450 would be the max for the Nintendo Switch 2. And now that the Nintendo Switch 2 website is live, there is a lot of info on this website that they didn't discuss in the Direct. It was quickly discovered on Nintendo's website that way at the bottom of the page for Mario Kart World, it says that the game will cost $80 MSRP. And that's when things started getting really messy with the Nintendo Switch 2 pricing. So I'm just gonna use GameStop's website here to easily show all of the prices for the Nintendo Switch 2 games. Mario Kart World for the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to cost $80. I believe there is some misinformation going around that Mario Kart World is going to be $80 digital and $90 physical. If I'm not mistaken, that is not true. I don't know, it's hard to say what is real or not right now because things are really messy. Again, Nintendo has oddly omitted a lot of information about the Nintendo Switch 2, but as far as I can tell, Mario Kart World will cost $80 both digital and physical, at least in the US. Meanwhile, the other brand new game that they revealed during the Direct, Donkey Kong Bonanza, is going to cost $70, which is obviously a $10 difference from Mario Kart World. So there's just a lot of weird things going on with these prices of the games, and it basically seems like it's going to be a case-by-case basis which games are going to cost $70, $60, or even $80. Things continue to get weirder when we look at some of the Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games that they revealed. Super Mario Party Jamboree Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Jamboree TV is going to cost $80 again. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Nintendo Switch 2 Edition is also going to cost $80. Meanwhile, the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild Nintendo Switch 2 Edition is going to cost $70, but then Kirby and the Forgotten Land Nintendo Switch 2 Edition is going to cost $80. So there's just a lot of wacky things going on here. Hashtag just weird Nintendo things. Now, I'm no analyst, but I did take one semester of economics in college. But it seems that there is a lot going on here in terms of inflation, obviously tariffs now. I especially found it interesting to check this US inflation calculator, which uses CPI data published by the US government. So from 2017, when the Nintendo Switch first came out, to now 2025, there was a cumulative rate of inflation of 30.2%, which means that if we have a $60 game in 2017, now in 2025, it would cost $78.10, or roughly about $80. If we even compare like 2012 when the Wii U was out to 2017 when the Switch came out, that is a rate of inflation of 6.8%, nearly 5 times less than what it is now. This is by no means me sort of justifying or, even explaining the prices of Nintendo Switch 2 games or anything like that. I just think it's really interesting data, and it's something something I think to sort of think about with how the prices of video games in general, not even just Nintendo, but even with like PlayStation 5 games. It's interesting to see how the pricing is changing over time. So I basically just think that the unfortunate pricing that we're getting with the Nintendo Switch 2 is a whole bunch of negative factors all rolled into one. Like, it's just a big snowball effect. And once again, with just like everything happening in the world right now, changing literally every hour, who knows what the prices will be by the time the Nintendo Switch 2 comes out. I mean, I guess the real question may even be, is the Nintendo Switch 2 actually going to come out? Another thing that Nintendo is kind of being hush-hush about right now regarding the Switch 2 are some of the system's tech specs. Going back to Nintendo's website, they do have a technical specs page for the Switch 2, and it shows a lot of the things that they mentioned in the Direct. For example, the larger 7.9-inch LCD screen, HDR10 support with variable refresh rate up to 120 Hz. But in regards to the CPU and GPU, they just say here, custom processor made by NVIDIA. To be fair, Nintendo has never been the type to, fully go into tech specs, like give us all of the nitty gritty. A lot of the times they just put it in the most basic form of explanation. But NVIDIA did recently confirm that the Switch 2 will be capable of ray tracing as well as AI-driven upscaling. So it is interesting to see, just how powerful the Switch 2 is going to be, which, is something that I think we're not used to with Nintendo systems. Let us not forget that the Nintendo Wii wasn't even in HD compared to the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. So for a company that doesn't really focus on specs, like they aren't worried about being the most powerful thing ever, it's surprising to see just how powerful the Switch 2 actually is. During the Direct, they only confirmed in the fine print that the Nintendo Switch 2 would support 4K at 60 frames per second in TV mode, and if you want 120 frames per second on the TV, you're gonna have to output at either 1080p or 1440p. And there was even more drama once people found out the battery life of the Nintendo Switch 2. According to Nintendo's own website, the Nintendo Switch 2 will last you approximately anywhere between 2 to 6.5 hours based on whatever game you're playing, which is actually less than the Switch 1. And I think that's kind of crazy. Considering that the Switch 2 appears to be pretty substantially bigger than the Switch 1, you would think that battery life would at least stay the same if not improve. Obviously, we are getting more power and more features, so that probably takes up a lot of the battery life. But still, it's crazy that we're actually taking a step backwards in terms of battery life. And I think we can pretty much all guess now that there's going to be a Nintendo Switch 2 sort of half-generation upgrade that has better battery life. Now moving on to the specs of the Joy-Con 2 controllers, Nintendo has surprisingly been very silent regarding, if the Joy-Con 2 fixes a lot of the issues of the Joy-Con 1s. Of course, a major issue being Joy-Con drift. As far as I can tell, it has never been confirmed whether or not the Joy-Con 2 controllers fix Joy-Con drift. I was really hoping that during the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, they would say that the Joy-Con 2 have Hall effect sticks, but unfortunately, we did not see that. From what I've heard, the Joy-Con 2 controllers have much larger thumbsticks, so maybe they're able to make the sticks more sort of substantial now that they're bigger. I guess we'll just have to wait and see whether or not people's Joy-Con sticks start to drift in the future. Another really crazy Joy-Con 2 spec that stood out to me is the fact that the Joy-Con are still using Bluetooth 3.0, which is something that I've always had a problem with in my Nintendo Switch Joy-Con. For whatever reason, whenever I use my Joy-Con with the Switch, if I hold the Joy-Con a certain way, it won't read any of my inputs. And from what I understand, it's kind of similar to, I don't know if you guys remember the iPhone antenna gate issue, where if you held the corner of the iPhone 4, you would just drastically drop cell phone reception. I guess that's kind of similar to what happens with the Joy-Con, because when I hold my Joy-Con sort of in the palm of my hand, the Bluetooth connection often does get interrupted. But again, because these Joy-Con 2 controllers are bigger, hopefully it fixes the issues with Bluetooth. I don't know if you guys remember, but back when the Nintendo Switch first came out, it was kind of a meme that the Joy-Con would disconnect and people would say like, make sure you're not playing your Nintendo Switch behind an aquarium because the water can interfere with the Bluetooth. So those are some of the specs that Nintendo has kind of been keeping a secret from us. Now, one of the Nintendo Switch 2's biggest features is the fact that it is backwards compatible with the original Nintendo Switch. And this means quite a few things. One, that we are getting Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games, and these are enhanced versions of Nintendo Switch games that can play on Nintendo Switch 2. So for example, with Super Mario Party Jamboree, we're getting upgrades in the graphics department with the ability to play in 1440p in TV mode. There's the new Game Share feature, which allows one player to share the game with other people without them needing a copy of the game. And there's also the ability to have your camera appear inside of the game, which is actually kind of cute. Plus, Super Mario Party Jamboree is even getting extra content added with Jamboree TV. And these are brand new game modes which make use of the features in the Nintendo Switch 2. So for example, there are new mini games that use the mouse control found in the Joy-Con 2. You can play game modes that completely rely on the Nintendo Switch 2 camera, or even the microphone on the Nintendo Switch 2. Meanwhile, games like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are basically just getting graphic upgrades, and that's pretty much it. Now, the interesting thing about these Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games is that they are going to be offered in two ways. The first way is that you can buy the entire package, so, you know, the base game of Super Mario Party Jamboree plus the Jamboree TV. Or if you already have a copy of the base game, like Super Mario Party Jamboree, then you can purchase an upgrade pack which gives you all of the extra goodies of the Nintendo Switch 2 Edition. And actually, something kind of cool is that on the website they do mention that if you have the Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack membership, you actually get the Nintendo Switch 2 Edition upgrade packs of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom for free. So that's actually something kind of nice, you know, where it's good to have the Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack membership. But as of right now, we still don't know how much these upgrade packs are going to cost individually. My best guess is that once again, it's going to be a case-by-case basis. So for example, with Mario Party Jamboree, since you're getting, you know, some extra content added with the whole game modes and stuff, that upgrade pack is going to cost more than, say, Breath of the Wild, which is just graphical upgrades. So who knows how much these upgrade packs are going to cost? I guess only Nintendo knows. But besides Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games, we also have just backwards compatibility with original Nintendo Switch games. Now, Nintendo does have a whole webpage dedicated to, you know, which games will work and which games will have issues with Nintendo Switch 2. There are some obvious compatibility issues with games like Nintendo Labo. The VR kit specifically won't work with Switch 2 since you have to put the Nintendo Switch inside of the VR Toy-Con. But they do offer whole PDF files with games that have startup issues or games that are playable but have some in-game compatibility issues. And interestingly enough, they do mention that they will have free updates for Nintendo Switch games to work on Nintendo Switch 2. They don't go into any detail about what these updates will include. They just say that the contents of these updates will differ depending on the game. But it would appear that these updates will include performance upgrades or even additional features like the Game Share feature on Nintendo Switch 2. And we have a few games listed here, like everything from ARMS to even Game Builder Garage. So it's kind of interesting because it appears Nintendo is approaching backwards compatibility kind of similar to how Xbox did it, where it took them a while to update all of the original Xbox games to work on Xbox One, for example. Now, there's also the question of compatibility with original Nintendo Switch accessories on Nintendo Switch 2. Nintendo has a whole customer support article about this. So controllers like the Joy-Con, the Pro Controller, and even the Nintendo Switch Online controllers will work with the Switch 2. My guess is that basically most, if not all, Bluetooth controllers will work with the Switch 2. But then we have some interesting accessories here that Nintendo says are not compatible with the Switch 2. For example, the tiny little charging stand that they released for the Switch will not be compatible with the Switch 2, even though it's basically just a little USB-C stand. So that's kind of interesting. The more obvious things like the Nintendo Switch 1 dock or, you know, the Joy-Con grips won't work with the Switch 2. But I kind of touched on this earlier. The Nintendo Switch AC adapter actually will not work with the Switch 2. And they explain it right here that due to the differing power output, it is not possible to use the Nintendo Switch 2 in TV mode using the Nintendo Switch AC adapter. But you can plug in the AC adapter directly into the console to charge it. So basically, it sounds like you can use the Nintendo Switch AC adapter to charge the console, but you can't use it to power the dock. Meanwhile, with the HDMI cable that is included with the original Nintendo Switch, they say that it is not compatible as the HDMI cable standards differ, but I feel like it's just going to be a difference of using a 1080p HDMI cable versus a 4K 60 one. In any case, they're basically just saying that the HDMI cable that is going to be included with the Switch 2 is faster than the one that is included with the original Nintendo Switch. So if you want to get all of the fancy graphics that come with the Switch 2, you know, the 4K 60 or 1080p at 120, you're gonna have to use the high-speed HDMI cable that comes with the Switch 2. So it's just really interesting because there's a lot of mystery regarding the Nintendo Switch 2 that Nintendo hasn't told us about yet. Let me know in the comments if you guys are hyped for the Nintendo Switch 2. If you want to hear me yap more about the Nintendo Switch, check out the video below. For now, thank you so much for watching. My name is Chase and I will see you guys again soon. Bye.